What in fact happened was, as America comes into the Second World War, it isn't documented, but it's broadly accepted that Winston Churchill becomes rather nervous that if American troops go to the south of England, they're very much in range of German air raids. Even though Belfast had been flattened in 1941, by 42 it was felt that they could not reach Northern Ireland for sustained attack by the Germans. So in fact, in 1942, there was 120,000 US personnel came to Northern Ireland to organise and form before they later went to England. The reason we had been blitzed was that we were an industrial powerhouse for the war effort. 174 of the Royal Navy ships had been built in Belfast, 3,000 planes and 50 million rounds of ammunition. So they were quite keen to end that. But what it meant was, after Belfast was blitzed, that we had extra security put in place. So whenever these guys come in, the bulk of the first wave of Americans to come in to the UK came here. And then whenever they decided that they wished to have an equivalent unit to the British Commandos, that they had to come to Northern Ireland to find those volunteers. So the word went out that they were wishing to have this basically special operations unit. 2,500 young men volunteered, and they were formed into the US Rangers here in our little camp in Carrickfergus. Okay. They named themselves after Robert Rogers, the Rogers Rangers from the Indian-French Wars. Yeah. Rogers was a descendant from Ulster, this province of Ulster. That's why they named themselves, to keep the connection to here. Quite quickly, it became aware that 2,500 was quite a large number for the British Commandos to train. Basically, reading between the lines, it was decided, okay, we will give these 1st Battalion extra training in leadership so that they then can train Americans. 2,500 was too large a number for Auchnacarry. So the way that they get them down in number is quite simple. They send them out, and if you could not run 5 miles in 37 minutes in full kit, you didn't go for further training. That in fact brought them down to 500. Oh, wow. It was thought that they had hoped for 600 in the 1st Battalion. Only 5 were capable of doing this, 500. So they go through this extremely rigorous training. You know, the British Commandos had a lot of experience by 42. They had been fighting from 39 and are basically the only guys that have been going into Europe, making raids and coming back across the channel again. So they got expertise from the commandos. They are basically commandos, British commandos with an American accent. And in fact, they buddy up together for their first raid. 50 Rangers joined the commandos along with Canadian forces for the raid on Dieppe. A disaster. 6,000 young men left England, only 3,000 came back. So the lessons were learned for D-Day. So once they complete their training, we never really leave them for the entirety of the war, the 1st Battalion, because they had no troop carriers. So they're given our 3 Belfast to Glasgow ferries. that were suspended for the war. We took them back into Harland and Wolff shipyard in Belfast and reconfigured them as troop carriers. We know some of those crews are Belfast crews, and we took them the whole way down to the very famous amphibious landing, Operation Torch, North Africa. So we take them there. And we're with them in some shape or form for all of their amphibious landings. So the bonds were very close between those Royal Navy Reserve from Belfast and the Rangers. Their heyday by far is North Africa, Sicily. And they're so often behind enemy lines at this time. And they gain a wealth of experience in North Africa. Very effective indeed, and hugely effective in Sicily. Rangers lead the way is the motto, and that is what they did then, and that's what they do today. So William Orlando Darby was their commanding officer. For us, we have a great pride in Carrickfergus. You know, Darby is such an important officer of the Second World War, highly decorated, and then to think that he was speed marching his men around our little town is something else. So he was certainly an officer that led from the front. He himself in Sicily takes out 3 Italian tanks, so to encourage his men. Unfortunately, as your ancestor killed Lake Garda, 1945, sorry, the same day that Adolf Hitler commits suicide. So they had only days to go.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, I'm not sure about your ancestor, but for Darby, it's highly unlikely that he knew that Hitler had committed suicide, because Germany didn't release it for 24 hours.
Yeah.
So, but I think he knew the end was coming for him. We left this province of Ulster, nothing to do with the potato famine in the mid-1700s. We left here partially through oppression and economic circumstances. About 250,000 of us left. Many of us went to South Carolina, as I'll explain a little bit later why. So our battle cry was liberty and freedom. And we totally acknowledge here that in our darkest day of our history, America came back to us to defend those rights of liberty and freedom. And their sacrifice was huge. Of the 500 boys, and we have to say boys, the youngest one to begin training was 17. By the end of the war, out of that 500, only 87 had not been killed, wounded, or captured. So today, Fort Benning, Georgia is the Ranger School. It has changed its name last year to Fort Moore. We have no idea how we will change that on this map. We need to change the wall. Because we are dealing with Second World War predominantly here, I think it will remain Fort Benning.
Yes.
So, in the modern era, 1992, a group of veterans of 1st Battalion arrived back to celebrate their 50th anniversary here in Carrickfergus. Since that, we have had quite a number of official visits, Rangers coming regularly, and these guys all refer to Carrickfergus as the Rangers' Holy Land, where it all began. Last year we had 8 officers flew in from Savannah with 42 descendants of the original 500.
Oh, wow.
Which was lovely. It really was an excellent weekend. We spent the whole weekend with them. Some questions got answered for me. this guy here, Steve Mead. Every document you lift on the Rangers, especially actions in North Africa, this guy's name comes up. And we had a photograph of him as an elderly man, but no photograph that I could find of him in uniform as a serving Ranger. So his 2 daughters and a granddaughter were here.
Oh, wow.
That came last year with the Rangers, and I had said to them, please, if you have a photograph of him, could you email me a copy of it? And they said, well, actually, we have only the same photograph that you have. And I said, we have a photograph of Steve Mead. So now I can introduce you to Steve Mead. He was there all along.
He was there all along, just didn't know it. Yeah.
Very cool.
This guy, and perhaps it is pronounced differently in the States, we all struggle with the spelling of it, Luslott, and he was the first American soldier killed in action in Europe in the Second World War. He was killed at Dieppe, and he trained here in Carrickfergus. So he's historically of great importance. For the modern era, of course, the Rangers are still in full operation. We hear little about them. There's reasons for that. As I was told by one officer, every country should have a regiment no one hears about. They're still very active. They're still there whenever we are not aware that they're there. But for those that have been lost, particularly in recent conflicts like Iraq and Afghanistan, it has become a little bit of a tradition, a pilgrimage, especially 1st Battalion, that their buddies will come here to write their name into the visitors book so that they're remembered here in the home of the regiment. For us, it's a great privilege to do that. Also, we hope, we are a country coming out of conflict.
Yes.
It was 30 years ago, but we're still coming out of that.
Right.
So we understand very well here of the pain and the process that families have to go through losing a loved one, particularly in conflict, because it happens so quickly. And we just hope that people back in the States, these families, understand that we're in solidarity with them, and we hope that that reflects that in some way they can get some comfort from that we understand. So yeah.